They said the War King felt nothing. They said the cold had gone all the way through him in the year his brother died, that what sat the black throne of the North was a thing shaped like a man and emptied of one, and that no woman alive would ever read warmth in him because there was none left to read. They said it where the kitchen girl could hear, the way people say cruel things in front of someone they have decided does not count. She did not argue. She only kept her eyes down and her hands moving, because she had learned long ago that the safest face was a blank one. What none of them knew, what the king himself did not know, was that the girl scrubbing the long oak in the scullery had spent her whole life learning to read the one language he had spent his whole life hiding, and that before the next blood moon rose, she would stand in a hall full of people who had spat her name, and watch a king lower himself to the stone at her feet. Stay with me, because the way it happened is stranger than the way they tell it now. The winter they called the Iron Winter came down on the keep of Varin in the year 904 of the Pack Reckoning, and it came to stay. Snow stood waist-high against the curtain wall by the solstice, and the cold was not weather so much as a presence in the rooms, a thing that pressed at the shutters and waited. Mira had come to the keep 3 winters before. Sold is the word the steward used, though he wrote bonded servant in the ledger, sent north to settle a debt her father had not lived to pay. She was 22 that winter, slight and quiet, with dark hair she kept bound under a rough linen scarf, and hands that had stopped being soft a long time ago. She worked the scullery and the still room and the linen presses, and she spoke to almost no one, and almost no one spoke to her. And that suited the shape of her grief well enough. She had not always been no one. Her father had been a bone setter and a wound reader, a man the lowland villages sent for when a thing was broken in a way the eye could not name, and he had taught his only daughter the whole of it before the fever took him in her 19th winter. He had taught her that a scar is a sentence the body writes after the fact, that the way a thing healed told you more than the way it was made, that a man's skin kept the ledger his mouth would never read aloud. He would sit her at the bedside of a farmhand with a shoulder set wrong 20 years before, and make her name the year of the break, by the way the muscle had knit crooked around it. And when she named it right, he would say nothing, only nod, which from him was everything. She had grown up tracing the silvered lines on farmhands and soldiers and old women, learning that pain leaves a grammar, that a body lies less than a tongue. It was the only thing she had ever been good at, and it was the only thing of his she had been able to carry north when the debt came due, because knowledge weighs nothing and cannot be sold off a wagon. In Varennes there was no call for it. In Varennes she scrubbed oak and held her tongue and waited for nothing, which was the only thing the keep offered freely, and she let the reading sleep in her hands like a banked fire and told herself she had forgotten how. The king was a rumor to her for the first 2 winters. Baal, they called him. The Iron King, the Wolf of the North. The man who had held the eastern passes against 3 packs at once, and come back from it changed. She saw him twice from a distance, a tall figure dark against the snow on the high wall, and both times the air in the courtyard seemed to lean toward him before the men did. A heaviness, a hush, the dogs going low and silent in the kennels. She did not look long. Looking long was how a servant earned attention, and attention in that keep was the kind of thing that left marks. What changed it was the steward's malice and a basin of fouled water. Halvard ran the keep's household the way a small man runs anything he is given, with a careful cruelty that always found the lowest target. And he had decided that the kitchen girl was getting above herself by virtue of being clean and silent. So when the king's own body servant fell ill of the lung rot 3 nights before the midwinter rite, Halvard sent Mira up the tower stairs with the bathing things and a thin smile, because the Iron King had been known to break the wrist of a servant who touched him wrong, and Halvard wanted to see what would come back down. She climbed the stairs with the basin steaming in the cold, and her heart going hard against her ribs, and she told herself the thing she always told herself, that a body was only a body, and she had handled worse than a king. There were 40 steps in the tower stair. She counted them the way she counted everything, and the cold came down them to meet her, so that the steam off the basin curled and thinned before she reached the top. A guard stood at the landing, the captain himself, with his flat eyes and the old healed break in his left forearm that she read at a glance, and filed away without meaning to. He looked at her, and at the basin, and stood aside, and said nothing, and the saying, nothing, was its own warning. The room at the top was vast and nearly dark. One low fire in a great hearth, and a single candle guttering on a long table, the rest of it shadow and stone, and the smell of cold iron and old smoke. A black wolf the size of a yearling calf lay along the hearth, and it lifted its head when she came in, and its eyes caught the firelight amber, and it did not growl. That was the first wrong thing. Wolves of that size did not let a stranger over a threshold without a sound. He stood at the window with his back to the door, bare to the waist, and the firelight moved across him, and Mira stopped on the threshold with the basin in her hands and forgot, for one whole breath, to be afraid, because she could read him. The whole back of him was written over in scars, a lifetime of them, and her eye went down the ledger of his skin before her mind could stop it the way another woman's eye might go down a page. She saw the long, clean line of a blade that had been stitched well and healed straight, an old fight, survived. She saw the puckered knot low on his side where something had gone in and been dug out badly, fever after, a wound that should have killed him. She saw the pale starbursts across one shoulder that were not battle at all, that were the marks a body makes when it has been burned in a pattern, deliberate, and her stomach turned over because she knew what made marks like that, and it was not war. "You may set it down," he said, without turning, and his voice was low and even and gave away nothing. "And go." She did not go. She should have. The wise thing, the safe thing, the thing 3 winters of silence had trained into her, was to set the basin on the table and bow her head and be gone down the stairs before he turned around. Instead, she heard her own voice come out of her. Steady, quiet, her father's voice almost. "The one on your shoulder," she said. That was done slow, and more than once. The room went very still. The fire spat. He turned then, and she saw his face for the first time, and it was not the cold mask the keep talked about. It was a hard face, a plain, lived-in face with a heavy brow and a nose that had been broken, and a short, dark beard going gray at the edge of the jaw, and his eyes, when they found her, were not empty at all. They were stunned. For the space of a breath, the Iron King of the North looked at a kitchen girl as though she had spoken in a language he had buried with his own hands. "Who told you that?" he said. It was not a question that wanted an answer. It was a door slamming. "No one told me," she said. "It's written on you. I read it." She watched him take that in. She watched something move behind the hard eyes and get locked down hard. And she understood that she had said a thing she could not unsay, and she braced for the risk Halvard had sent her up to lose. Bale only looked at her a long moment, and the heaviness she had felt in the courtyard filled the room, and then he said, very quietly, "Set it down and go. Do not speak of this." And she went. On the stairs, with her heart slamming, she understood 2 things she had not known an hour before. The king felt something, and whatever had burned that pattern into his shoulder had been done to him by someone he could not fight. She told no one. There was no one to tell, and it was not a thing for telling. The keep is a small world in winter, and the next morning the word was already moving along the servants' passages that the kitchen girl had gone up the tower and come down with both her wrists, which had never happened before. Halvard looked at her over the morning bread with a new and careful hatred, because she had survived the thing he meant to break her with, and that is the kind of failure a small man does not forgive. And up in the high hall, In the council that ran the north in the king's silences, a tall woman in deep green watched the same word arrive and filed it away, because the Lady Rhaena had spent 2 years arranging to stand at Bael's side and did not intend to be surprised by a scullery maid. If you have ever been the one in the room who does not count, you already know the rest of this in your bones, and I would ask you to stay close, because the part where the counting reverses is the part worth waiting for. The midwinter rite came and went, the great hall packed with the banners of the lesser packs come to swear the year's faith, and Mira watched it from the servant's shadow at the back, carrying wine she was not permitted to pour. She watched the Lady Rhaena stand a half step from the king's right hand as though the place were already hers. She watched Bael sit the black throne with his hands still on the stone arms, and she watched the way no one came too near him, the way the whole hall arranged itself around a man it was afraid to touch. And she thought of the pale starbursts on his shoulder and understood that the fear in the hall and the fear in his skin were the same fear wearing two faces. The second time she was sent up the tower, it was no accident. The body servant died of the lung rot, and the king sent down a single line by the captain of his guard, a man named Tor with a soldier's flat eyes and an old break in his left forearm that Mira read at a glance, that the girl from the scullery was to bring the bathing things and the salves from the still room and tend the king's old wounds, which troubled him in the cold. Halvard's face, when he relayed it, was a study in swallowed fury. Rhaena's face, when she heard, was worse, because it was smooth. So began the strange, close winter that Mira would think of afterward as the only time in 3 years she had been wholly herself. She went up the tower stairs in the deep blue of the evenings, and she tended the Iron King's body the way her father had taught her, with the salve and the heated cloth and the long, firm pressure that breaks old scar binding and lets a wound that healed wrong finally lie quiet. The Black Wolf moved to lie at her side on the second night, its great head heavy against her knee while she worked, and she found her free hand resting in the rough fur of its neck without remembering having put it there. She did not speak much, he spoke less. Yet she read him as she worked, the whole ledger of him, and slowly, without meaning to, she began to read the parts that were not on his skin. There was a chair by the hearth no one sat in, turned slightly toward the throne room stair, and she understood after a week that it had been his brother's. There was a sword on the wall with a ruby in the hilt that he never touched and never had moved. And she understood that too, eventually, without being told. She learned that he did not sleep. She learned it from the gray under his eyes and the way his hands were never quite still, and the single candle that was always burned to nothing by the time she came. She learned that the burn on his shoulder made him flinch from heat on that side, that he had taught himself to take the flinch and bury it deep enough that another would not catch it, and that the teaching had cost him something she could not name and would not ask after. She worked the salve into it the third night, slow, warming it first in her palms so the heat would not startle the old fear in the muscle, and felt him hold himself still under her hands by an act of will, and said nothing, and was careful, ever after, to warm it first. She learned, the fourth night, working the salve low along a ridge of scar over his ribs, that one of the wounds she had read as old battle was not. It was the puckered star of a crossbow bolt, and the angle was wrong for any enemy he could have faced, because it had gone in from behind and low, the angle of a man kneeling, the angle of someone he had let stand at his back. This one, she said, before she could stop herself. This was not the war. His whole body had gone rigid under her hands. "Leave it," he said. "It went in from behind," she said quietly. "From below. You were on your feet and they were not. Someone you trusted enough to let close." She took her hand away. "I'm not asking you to tell me. I'm telling you that I can read it, and that whoever told you it was an enemy's bolt lied to you, or you have let yourself believe a lie, because the truth is worse." The silence after that was the longest one yet. The fire moved. And then the Iron King did a thing that Mira had not seen him do, that perhaps no one had seen him do in the year since his brother died. He laughed once, short and bitter and astonished, and he turned his head and looked at her, and the mask was simply not there. 3 winters, he said. I have had the best healers of 4 packs in this room. They tended the meat and called it loyalty. You have been here a quarter hour and you have found the knife in my back. He looked at her a long moment. What is your name? Mira, she said. Mira, he said, as though testing the weight of it. And something happened in the room when he said it, a warmth, a turning, that had nothing to do with the fire, and Mira felt it land low in her chest like a struck bell, and told herself it was the heat of the work, and knew, even as she told herself, that it was a lie. She gathered the salves with hands that were not quite steady, and she went down the stairs. And behind her, the king sat looking at the door long after it had closed. The cracks came after that, small ones, the kind a careful woman collects without letting herself add them up. The night he sent Tor down with a fur-lined cloak because the stairs were cold, and Tor delivered it with a flat soldier's face that did not quite hide his surprise. The morning she found the still room restocked with rare oils a scullery maid had no business being given. The council day she passed the high hall door and heard the king's voice cut across some lordling's complaint with a single cold line, and heard the complaint stop, and realized the complaint had been about her, about the unseemliness of a bonded girl in the king's tower, and that he had ended it without raising his voice. She told herself these were a king's whims. She told herself a powerful man tidies his household the way he tidies anything, without it meaning more. The wolf in her, the small suppressed thing she had spent 3 years pretending she did not have, knew better and clawed at her in the dark, and she lay on her pallet in the cold and refused to let it speak the word it wanted to speak. What she did not know, what the audience watching from above the board could already see, was that the Lady Rhaena had not spent 2 years climbing toward the Black Throne to be undone by a girl who could read scars. Rhaena's power was not in her blood, which was good but not royal, nor in her beauty, which was considerable, and which she used the way a swordsman uses a blade he has carried so long he no longer feels its weight. Her power was in the council, in the 3 elder lords who had run the north through the king's worst year, and had grown to like the running of it, and in the thing she had brought north from the lowland courts in a small iron box, wrapped in lead, so its breath would not reach her own skin. She had met with the eldest of the lords in the still room after the household slept, more than once, and Mira, who slept badly and worked the still room before dawn, had found the faint bitter trace of an oil she did not stock, and had thought nothing of it at the time, because a careful woman files a thing away before she knows what it is. The box held wolfsbane, the silver kind, the rare cultivar that did not merely sicken a wolf, but suppressed the shift entirely, that could take the most powerful predator in the north and leave him a shaking man with a failing heart, and Rhaena meant to use it not on the king's life, but on the keep's faith in him. A king who collapsed at the blood moon rite, who could not hold his wolf before the gathered packs, who folded on the dais in front of 4 packs come to swear the year's faith, was a king the council could set aside for a regency, gently, regretfully, for the good of the north. And a regency needed a Luna to make it seem like continuance, rather than a theft. She had it all arranged, every piece, every paid mouth. She had not arranged for a scullery girl who read skin. The blood moon rite fell that year on the longest cold of the winter, the night the elder lords had chosen to renew the faith of the lesser packs. The night every banner in the north would be gathered in the great hall to watch the Iron King take his wolf form before them and prove the strength that held the passes. Mira learned the shape of the danger by accident, the way servants learn everything, carrying linens past the still room 3 nights before, hearing the Lady Rhaena's voice through the door, low and amused, and the dry cough of one of the elder lords, and a single sentence that stopped her in the corridor with her arms full of cloth. The king's wine, on the night of the rite, was to be cut with something that would keep his wolf chained while the whole north watched him fail. She stood in the cold passage with her heart slamming and the linens going slack in her arms, and she understood that she was the only person in the keep who knew, and that she was a bonded scullery girl whose word was worth precisely nothing against the Lady Rena's, and that if she spoke she would simply disappear down a stair and be a debt the ledger no longer needed to track. She did not sleep that night or the next. She went up the tower and she tended the king's wounds and she said nothing, because she had no proof, and a servant's accusation against a council lady was a noose she would tie herself, and she watched him in the candlelight, and could not find the way to make him believe a thing she could not prove. On the third night, the night before the rite, the words came out of her sideways, the only way she could risk them. If a man wanted to chain a wolf for a night, she said, working the salve along his shoulder, not looking at his face. Not kill it, only keep it from its shape. There are things that do that. Silver wolfsbane, the lowland kind. It has no taste in wine. She felt him go still. A man would want to be careful. The night of a rite. What he drank that he had not poured himself. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his hand came up and closed around her wrist. Not hard, and turned her so she had to look at him. And his eyes searched her face the way she had searched his skin, reading. "What do you know?" he said, low. "I know what I heard," she said. "I cannot prove it. I am no one. If I name her, you will have to choose whether to believe a kitchen girl over your counsel, and I know which way that goes." She held his gaze. "So I am not naming anyone. I am telling you what wolfsbane does and asking you to be careful. That is all I have to give you." And there, in the candle dark with his hand around her wrist and the cold pressing at the shutters, the second crack opened all the way and did not close. He looked at her as though he were seeing the whole of her at once, the scullery and the silence and the steady hands and the thing underneath, and his thumb moved once, slow, across the inside of her wrist where the skin was thin, and she felt it everywhere. Felt the breath go out of her, felt the wolf she had buried lunge up against the inside of her ribs with a single word. She would not let it finish. Neither of them moved. The fire burned down, and then he let her go, gently, and said only, "Thank you, Mira." And the using of her name was worse than the touch, because it was tender, and tenderness from the Iron King was a thing she did not know how to survive. She went down the stairs not knowing if he had believed her. The day of the rite the keep filled to its stones. Banners came in under the gate all afternoon, the gray wolf of the river Pax and the black boar of the eastern hills and a dozen more, lords and their shield men stamping snow in the courtyard. The great hall hung with evergreen and lit with 100 torches against the dark. Mira worked the whole day on her feet in the kitchens, her hands raw in the wash water, and twice she passed close enough to the Lady Rena in the passages to catch again that faint bitter trace of the lowland oil and to feel her stomach drop, and twice she said nothing, because there was nothing yet to say. At dusk she was sent up with the rest of the under-servants to stand in the shadowed gallery above the hall, and be ready to carry what was called for. From there she could see all of it. She could see the black throne on its dais and the long tables and the gathered strength of the north. And she could see the Lady Rena in deep green and silver at the high table, lovely and composed. And she could see the cup at the king's right hand that a page had filled and that the king had not yet touched. The rite began with the elder lords droning faith words, and the lesser alphas kneeling one by one to lay their hands on the dais stone. Mira watched Baal through all of it, watched him sit unmoving with his hands on the throne, and watched him lift the cup at the appointed moment when the eldest lord called for the king to drink to the faith of the Pax, and her heart stopped in her chest. She could do nothing. She was a girl in a gallery, She watched the Iron King raise the poisoned cup to the whole gathered north, and she watched him pause and look across all that torchlit distance, up into the shadow of the gallery, until he found her face. He held her eyes, and then, deliberately, he turned his wrist and poured the wine out onto the dais stone, a long red ribbon of it splashing across the flags, and the hall went utterly silent. "The faith of the North," said the Iron King into that silence, "is not proven by what a king will swallow without looking." He set the empty cup down. "Bring me a clean cup, and bring me the one who filled this one." The hall came apart in murmurs. The eldest lord half rose, and the Lady Rena at the high table did the thing that undid her. The small thing, the thing Mira saw from the gallery and understood at once. She looked, fast and involuntary, not at the king and not at the spilled wine, but at the small lead-wrapped box she had thought safely hidden in the folds at her waist, the way a hand goes to a wound. Tor saw it too. Tor had been watching her on the king's word for 3 nights, and the captain of the guard crossed the hall in 6 strides and took the Lady Rena by the arm, and the box came loose and struck the stone and split, and the smell of silver wolfsbane went up sharp and bitter into the torchlight, where 4 packs could witness it. What followed was not quick, and it was not gentle, and the niche of it does not need me to dwell. The elder lords tried the bluster of men who have run a thing too long to imagine losing it, and the king let them talk until they had hanged themselves on their own arrangements, the page naming who had paid him, the apothecary in the lowland market traced by a man Tor had sent south a fortnight before. Because the Iron King, it turned out, had believed the kitchen girl from the first night and had simply been quieter about it than his enemies. The proof came out piece by piece before the gathered North, and the faith the right was meant to renewed itself around a different truth, that the king had been knifed once from behind by his own, and had nearly been chained a second time, and that the hand behind both reached up through the council itself. Rena did not go quietly. At the end, when the lead box lay split on the stone and her allies would not meet her eyes, she turned on the gallery and found Mira's face and screamed that it was a scullery rat, a bonded debt, a no one who had done this. And the Iron King rose from the black throne. He came down off the dais. The hall fell back from him the way it always did, the heaviness rolling out ahead of him, the lesser wolves going low. He did not go to Rena, and he did not go to the lords. He crossed the whole length of the great hall under the eyes of 4 gathered packs, and he stopped beneath the gallery, and he looked up at the girl in the rough scarf who had been sent up the tower to lose her wrist, and in front of all the North he went down. Onto one knee, on the cold flags, the Iron King of the North, the wolf who had held the eastern passes against 3 packs, knelt to a bonded scullery maid and bared the side of his throat in the old way, the way a wolf yields to the only one it will yield to. "I have worn every scar in this hall as armor," he said, and his voice carried because the hall was silent enough to carry a breath. "She read them as wounds. She is the only one who ever has." He did not say more than that. He did not need to. It was the whole of it in 3 lines, the way he did everything. For a moment no one moved, and then, along the high table and down the long benches and through the packed body of the hall, the North began to kneel. The lesser alphas first, the ones who had laid hands on the dais an hour before. Then their shield men, then the river lords and the eastern lords, one by one, and then in a long folding wave, until the whole gathered strength of the North was down on the stone, and the only ones still standing were the girl in the gallery and the 2 elder lords the guards now held, and the Lady Rena, who stood alone in deep green in a hall that had decided in the space of a kneeling that she was the no one now. 3 winters Mira had been a debt in a ledger, a thing that did not count, a name said cruelly in front of her because she was not worth the lowering of a voice. She stood in the gallery and counted the bowed necks below her, hundreds of them, 4 packs worth, and could not make the number be real. They came for her with torches and brought her down the gallery stair, and the crowd parted, and she walked the length of the hall she had only ever crossed in shadow carrying things she was not allowed to pour. The flags were cold through her thin shoes, and the torchlight ran gold along the kneeling backs, and she made herself walk slow and even because her father had taught her that the body tells the truth, the mouth conceals, and she would not let her body tell this hall that she was afraid. Bale was still on one knee when she reached him. Up close she could see that his hands, which were never still, were shaking, and that the gray under his eyes was the gray of a man who had not slept in a year and had decided tonight to stop pretending he could do this alone. The black wolf had come down off the dais and stood at his side with its amber eyes fixed on her, and behind it, in a loose half-circle, a dozen more had come in from the cold courtyard, through the great doors no one had opened, gray and dark and silver, sitting in the rushes facing her, every one of them turned toward the girl in the rough scarf, as though she were the still point the whole night turned on. She did not make him kneel longer for the pleasure of it. That was not in her, and the world would deliver her vindication without her stooping to claim it. She put out her hand, the steady hand, the reader's hand, and she laid it against the side of his bared throat where the pulse was, and she felt his wolf rise to meet it under the skin, whole and unchained and enormous, the thing Rena had meant to steal from the whole North in a cup. "Get up," she said quietly, only for him. "I've read enough of you on your knees." He got up. And when he stood, he kept her hand, and he turned with it to face the hall. And the proclamation he made was 4 words long. "This is your Luna." That was all. 4 packs heard it. 4 packs had already knelt to it. The elder lords were taken that night and their lands divided before the snow broke. The hand that had reached up through the council, the lowland duke who had paid for the bolt in the king's back 2 years before, and the wolfsbane in his cup tonight, was named in the apothecary's confession and would not see another winter. But that reckoning belonged to the spring and to other men, and the Right Hall held no more of it. The Lady Rena was stripped of her green and her name and sent south under guard to the court that had sent her, which is its own kind of ending for a woman whose whole power was being wanted in the right rooms. The keep that had sold Mira as a debt now wrote her name in a different ledger, the one that named the Luna of the North. And Halvard the steward, who had sent a girl up a tower to be broken, served at her table for the rest of his small life, and was careful, ever after, to lower his voice. The spring came late that year and came hard, the way northern springs do, the snow going to black mud and then to green in the space of 3 weeks. Mira kept the still room. She had it enlarged and stocked, and she took the keep's hurts as her father had taken the lowland villages, the broken wrists and the wounds that healed wrong, and she trained 2 girls from the scullery to read what a body wrote because she remembered being a girl who could read and was given nothing to read. The North called her the Reader before it called her the Luna, and both names stuck. She never again wore the rough scarf, but she kept it, folded in the small iron box that had once held a debt's papers, because a woman should remember the weight of the thing she was lifted out of. On the first warm night of that spring she found the king on the high wall where she had first seen him 3 winters before, dark against a sky going soft at last, and she came up beside him without a word, the way she had learned to, and he reached for her hand without looking, the way he had learned to. His hands were still now. She had read that too, over the winter, the slow quieting of them, and had said nothing, because some things a body says better than a mouth. She turned his hand over in the last light and traced with one finger the old straight line of the blade that had healed clean, the survived thing, and then the puckered star where the bolt had gone in from behind, the betrayed thing, and then she folded his scarred fingers closed over her own, and he let her, and below them in the dark, the keep settled toward sleep, and the wolves in the kennels were quiet, and the cold, for the first time in a year, had let go of the stones.